Hi, Thierry. How are you? Hello. Buena tarde a tothom. Buenas tardes. Gracias por acompañarnos. We have here Thierry Malleret with us, and he's a great economist and just wrote a wonderful book with a lot of interesting insights. And I've seen you not skiing today in Chamonix as you were during the interview of this Sunday at El Periódico, which was a great interview, loved. But you live in Switzerland, and you're very, near to the snow. You were telling us before the connection that you're having, a lot of snow there, and maybe had some problems with the Wi-Fi. We hope not, right? So let me just briefly introduce you, and we're first gonna connect with the person, and then gonna go into the topics of your book and your proposals for this year. And Thierry Malleret is founder of the Monthly Barometer and co-author of the book COVID-19, The Great Reset, with Klaus Schwab, who is the founder of the World Economic Forum. Thierry is our keynote speaker, our guest tonight at CASA SEAT, even if it's online because of COVID, of course. And we're going to discuss with you about New Year resolutions. What things do we have to bear in mind this 2021 after and during still this pandemic that has struck us all last year in March. So we are nearly 1 year, within this pandemic, and there has been a lot, to be learned and still a lot to do. So first, as I said, we want to first, know the person and then know the topic. And I wanted to ask you some very short personal questions. The first one would be, what's the most important thing that your parents taught you?
Well, Cristina, first of all, thank you so much for having me. And I wish I could be with you in Barcelona. It's a city which I love very much. So hopefully soon, when the pandemic is behind us.
We'll have the chance soon.
Hopefully soon. My parents, like most parents, taught me many, many things. And when you ask this question, I find it incredibly difficult to disentangle the many lessons taught to me from my parents. I guess that the respect of others is one that stands out. If I should only name one,
which is
respecting others, having respect for other people with different opinions from different origins.
Very good. And among all these things that they taught you, what is the most important thing that you can teach the others?
Well, I guess it's it's the same. We live in a world that is very divided, a world that is being increasingly polarized, and I think the virtues of altruism, empathy mean a lot if you want to have a social fabric that stands and remains solid in difficult times.
Yeah, empathy is a great, great word. I wanted to ask you also, which is for you the best city to live and the best city to visit?
Well, I love the city in which I live, which is Chamonix, and in fact it's in France. It's very near the border with Switzerland, but it's in France, just on the border with Switzerland and Italy. And it's a mountain resort. You have beautiful ones in Spain, of course, and I love living in the mountains. Well, cities that I love visiting are many. Barcelona is one of them. I like cities with a buzz. I like cities with a great deal of culture, architecture, in which you can eat well, in which you can meet nice people. And in Barcelona, you can tick all the boxes. It's a great place. And in fact, I travel to Barcelona almost once a year in normal conditions, at least.
Great. You know, SEAT is an automotive company and the company dealing with mobility and mobility services. And I wanted to ask you, which was the first car that you drove?
Well, you know, surprisingly, I'm not very interested in cars. Of course, they're important, and I can't remember which is the first car I bought. But I do remember that when I visited my mother-in-law for the first time, which was ages ago, she had a SEAT. This I remember.
Your mother-in-law.
Yeah, in England.
Great.
I was in English.
And apart from skiing, which is very clear to us, which is the best way for you to move now?
Well, I love, you know, walking. Everything that entails physical movement is great when I'm not in a car, of course. So walking is fantastic. It's a fantastic activity. The main important thing is to keep moving. Barcelona
is great for that because it's a city walking distance, always human scale, which is great for that.
City. It's a very walkable city.
Yeah. Something you really would like to do before you die, what would that be?
Well, I'd love to travel to one place that appeals to me very much and to which I haven't been yet. It's Patagonia.
Perito Moreno, absolutely. And a desire for our planet, for our society, which is a desire you want to share for all of us.
The desire is to make it more sustainable, but it's not a desire. No, it's an absolute necessity, as we will discuss presumably during our conversation.
It's
both a desire and a very important necessity.
Absolutely. It's a swing or sink thing, right? So
absolutely.
We're going to get into your wonderful book, and I've heard you're a very optimistic person and that you take, things always in a positive way. And we wanted to talk about positive, ideas and New Year resolutions and things we can do better, after the COVID. And I've heard that you have very good news, and I wanted to ask you, which are those very good news that you want to share with us tonight?
Well, resolutions, of course, are important. And when we are entering a new year, it's commonplace to express wishes. But express a wish is not sufficient. We have to put into place all these measures and instruments and policies that will make these wishes a reality. So my big resolution for this year is to make sure that we get it right. We are now in a very difficult situation, all of us globally. As you pointed out, we are still in the midst of the pandemic. In fact, the worst of the pandemic is happening right now in many respects. We have a new variant. It's going to last for longer than we thought. And this gives us a chance, like every occurrence when we face a deep crisis, to address the issues that we face. So my resolution is to do everything we can to get it right and to implement the right policies so that we emerge from the pandemic with the possibility to have a better world for our children, better society, more inclusive, more sustainable.
That's a super topic. Get it right, but what a difficult thing, right? There is a book about, I think it's Savoya, which is make sure you have the right it before making it right. So what would be that it? What do we have to do to really improve our, society, the lives of our kids? What do we have to do? What's that it?
Well, there are two things. You're asking me one, but I'm going to respond with two, if I may. And the core of the argument in the book is that we need to get two things right if we want to emerge from this mess. One is to make the world more inclusive, because inequality is one of the greatest issues that we face at the moment. Inequalities between genders, between countries, between people, inequalities of wealth, inequality of outcome, inequalities of revenues, etc., etc. So solving inequalities or addressing inequalities in a positive manner is an absolute necessity. The other is the environment. COVID has made it clear that we face a very, very serious environmental problem. It's one of the great insights from COVID, in a way, that we now all collectively realize that climate change is happening. It's serious. We had from experts why the pandemic took place. We heard from experts why there is a serious risk about climate change. It's an existential risk. It's much more serious than COVID. COVID will be behind us in a few months' time. Climate change is going to be with us for years. So we need to address it and to get it right and to put into place sustainable policies, which are, again, as you said at the beginning, hopeful. We can do so in a hopeful way, not in a way that is destructive in terms of growth or employment.
Absolutely. So this diagnosis about, inequality and climate change, which is a great diagnosis, do you think we are on the right path? Because I'm sure that COVID just made us clear something that was already present before, but also COVID has brought us all these plastic gloves and masks. And, when we talk about climate change, not everything that COVID brought was good. And we talk about, when we talk about equality, maybe COVID has also enhanced the inequality. We see how the vaccine is distributed. We see how the, pandemic stroke, lower income families. So how do you guess we're on the right path, or what do we have to do to really, make sure we get these it's that you mentioned, the equality and the climate right there?
Cristina, you are absolutely right regarding inequality and also climate change and also the environment. COVID has had the effect so far of exacerbating all the big problems we face and the trends that pre-existed the pandemic. Yeah. And it is true that today we know, thanks to COVID, that inequalities are getting worse. We know it. Every day you have new reports indicating, for example, that gender inequality has suffered dramatically from COVID. One of the big losers of COVID is the 50% of the world population that is feminine. Mm-hmm. We know it. There are reports. We know that there are tremendous inequalities in terms of the way in which COVID affects people. If you're poor, or if you live in a poor country, you're much more likely to be hit by COVID and to die from it. So you are right. But the fact that we are now collectively aware of this problem makes it unacceptable in a way. And we can see already in countries like the US with what happened during the course of the pandemic, that we've gone beyond a threshold that makes this problem unacceptable to a very large majority of the population. So if it becomes unacceptable, it's going to be addressed. So the criticality of the problem makes it possible to address it, if I may say so. Regarding the environment, you're right. Of course, now we have zillions of masks and gloves, plastic gloves and masks being spread all around the world. But again, we are collectively aware that we need to take care of the nature around us. So the fact that COVID momentarily has made it worse is a sign of optimism. And what I would like to say rapidly, if I may, is that when we wrote the book back in March, April, May, we thought, well, maybe the environment post-COVID will suffer considerably because many countries will think that it's better to grow at any price economically, and then we'll see after about the environment and the problem that have been posed. But in fact, the reality today seems to indicate otherwise. Today, not every single country, but the majority of countries are making very strong commitments to the environment. And the prime example is Europe. Yeah. Europe is a fantastic example and the greatest sign of hope regarding the fact that the recovery policies will be extremely dependent on green investment. That's going to be the case in Europe.
Sure. So maybe we had to touch the bottom, right, to go up again, right? So we are now in the dark.
You're right. And, when we are in a difficult position, as we are at the moment, in terms of growth, in terms of social problems, in terms of geopolitical disturbances, in terms of global governance, it gives us an opportunity to change, because change is painful. You don't want to change when you are not forced into change. Well, now we have to change. We know it because the situation is bad. So you're absolutely right. We reached the bottom, hopefully, and now we have to come out with bad things.
So as I said, you're a very optimistic person, and you bring good news always. So which are the good news? What good things will happen, due to this COVID? Now, maybe it's difficult to see them because we are now in the bottom, at the dark side. But as soon as light comes up, right, what are we going to see? What good changes are we going to see in our society? Due to this collective conscience also.
Yeah, of course. Well, as you very kindly said, I'm an optimist by nature, but I'm also often forced into pessimism when I see the state in which we're in at the moment. We cannot be blind to the difficulties that we are facing, and there are many major problems that need to be overcome as we emerge from the pandemic. There is a dramatic lack of global governance. There are going to be phenomenal problems in terms of economic recovery because we are super indebted. The policies are at the moment exacerbating inequalities, so there is a conundrum from which it's going to be very difficult to find a solution. But I will go back in terms of optimism to the two reasons that I just gave you. I think that the two key problems that we faced before the pandemic and that have been exacerbated by the pandemic are going to be addressed because it's an absolute necessity, and now there is a majority of the world population who sees it that way.
You said once that neoliberalism was no longer an option, that we have to find a new economic way, a new way to rule the world. Which could be that new way?
Well, in the book, we make an important distinction between liberalism and neoliberalism. And neoliberalism, we think, is a dogma. It's a dogma that has prevailed over the past 20, 30 years. It originated with the ideas put forward by Reagan and in the US and Thatcher in the UK. It was based on the belief that the markets always get it right. It was based on the belief that you should deregulate to the maximum possible extent. It was based on the belief that the state is bad per se, which is absurd. It was based on the belief that we should financialize the economy as much as we can. And the crisis, not only the COVID crisis, but the crisis of 2008, 2009, the excesses of capitalism have made it absolutely plain that neoliberalism has come to an end. Mm-hmm. And in the book, we explain that we are hopefully likely to return to a more liberal equilibrium in which the virtues of stakeholder capitalism prevail, meaning that you don't only pursue financial objectives when you are in business, but you care about your client, your employee, your supplier, the ecosystem in which you operate, and you try to do well and to do good. I mean, the two are not incompatible. The dichotomy between the state and the private sector is just absurd. It's an illusion. In fact, the two coexist, and the two can work together very efficiently. And we, in the book, we give several examples. There are countries with a strong state system, like Singapore, who are tremendously efficient from an economic point of view. So the two can coexist, and the liberalism has to be, brought back to its root in terms of the balance between different sectors.
It's like purpose and profit can go together and have to go together, right?
Of course. Why wouldn't they? It's absurd to have this binary vision that it's either the private sector or the state sector. No, the two can coexist and work en bonne intelligence, as we say in French, intelligently together.
Sure. Writing a book is an enormous effort, and you did it during the COVID. So I wanted to ask you about what was the goal of writing this book? What did you want to tell people, and why choosing Mr. Schwab to co-write it with you? So tell us about the experience and your goals with this book.
Well, maybe Mr. Schwab, who decided to co-write it with me.
Okay, so he invited you. It was the other way around.
I can tell you, early March, just before confinement, I had this idea of writing a book because I thought that pandemic would be a momentous event, a monumental shock imposed on the economy and the societies of the world, but also would be a game-changing opportunity. And Professor Schwab, so the founder and executive chairman of the WEF, thought the same. And one day, he called me and he said, oh, I have this idea of writing a book. And I said, well, I had this idea as well. We had it at the same time. So we decided to write it together. And it was a wonderful experience. And, of course, the WEF, being the institution that we know, also gave us access to an incredible range of decision makers, of activists, of NGOs, of global CEOs, of policymakers. And therefore, the book is, to a very large extent, based upon these conversations we had with them. So this profound sentiment that things are changing is corroborated by the interviews that we conducted when writing the book.
It seems like very appropriate to that time to write something that is really in collaboration and through the conversation, right? So COVID has also brought this collective conscience, this recognition also of the economy of care, for example, what doctors and nurses do, what people at supermarkets when they kind of help you, buy you food. So do you think that also when we talk about inequality, when we talk about collaboration, this economy of care will have in future the place that it kind of deserves?
I'm sure you're right, and I'm sure it will. And the reason is the following. One of the dogma of this neoliberal economy was that individuals are selfish and are obsessed about maximizing their utility. I'm an economist. This is what I was taught as a student for years and years. It's absolutely wrong. We're not selfish. We're social animals. We want to collaborate. We want to cooperate. We want to negotiate. We want to find common solutions to the problems we face. And when writing the book, we have a chapter devoted to the importance of rethinking the social contract, and we think it's going to happen, because what emerged very strongly during the pandemic, and particularly during the first wave and the confinement back in the spring of last year, is that the people who are valued the most, the people who are valued the least in financial terms, because the salary is so meager, the nurses, the people who deliver what we eat to survive, the people who make our environment livable by cleaning it, the teachers who invest in the future generations, all these people have tremendous value, and yet their financial value is totally distorted. They are not being rewarded from a societal point of view as we should reward them in terms of collective preferences. And so we think in the book that this is going to change, that the social contract will be rewritten, rethought, and that there'll be a better alignment between societal values and financial recognition, because it's totally, I think, inconceivable in tomorrow's world that a hedge fund manager can earn several hundred millions per year in some cases, in some extreme cases, while a nurse who saves your life earns 1,500 euros per month. It's not sustainable, and there is a degree of immorality in this. So we believe it will change.
Sure. In your book, you also talk about natural capital. Could you tell us about this?
Well, it's the same in terms of values that are changing. Up to the pandemic, we thought that the only thing that had value in our life are the things that have financial value, right? That's what we thought. If something doesn't have a financial value, it has zero value. Take the example of water. take the example of the air we breathe, take the example of the quality of the soil. Well, all these things didn't have any value and still have very little economic value. However, they are priceless, right? We know it. And for two reasons. First of all, the pandemic is a zoonotic disease. It is transmitted from animals to humans. And there is a huge amount of literature, scientific literature, showing that to a large extent, zoonotic diseases are being accelerated by deforestation. So if we don't take care of nature, these sort of things tend to happen more. The second big discovery that took place during COVID, and it's not new because it happened with SARS as well, is that the quality of the air we breathe is absolutely essential. Bad quality of air is now clearly correlated with a greater likelihood of falling ill from COVID and from dying from COVID. This is the reason why, for example, the crisis was so acute in Lombardy, in northern Italy, in March, one of the reasons. So the pandemic has made us aware that nature is absolutely vital to our own individual well-being. So the well-being of the planet and the well-being of individuals are the two faces of the same coin. And natural capital is something which is going to emerge stronger from COVID, because we recognize that a lot of the value embedded in the economy stems from nature. And in fact, we quote a report in the book that says that today the global GDP is $44 trillion roughly. And economists assume that half of this is directly or indirectly produced by nature. If it were not for nature, we would be in deep, deep trouble. Think about the work of bees and the pollination of bees. If we didn't have bees, how much would it cost to pollinize the flowers? Billions and billions and billions, etc., etc. So it's important to recognize the importance of natural capital.
I wrote a wonderful sentence. I don't know who wrote it. I wrote a wonderful sentence that said that nature has put us humans to think of what we did to the earth. So it's a great, summary of what was happened. No?
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you now, going into the European Union, the three big challenges for Europe in the years to come, in these new 20s we have. What do you think are these new big challenges, if you could summarize them in three?
Right. Well, it's a very tough question. I'm going to do my best in broad terms. Well, first of all, I think that we have to nurture a sense of unity. We have to realize that we are in this together, Europeans. And we have to be conscious of the fact that what unites us in terms of European values and identity is much stronger than what divides us. And I think one of the effect of Brexit is to have made this very vivid to many Europeans. The second precondition is to collaborate and cooperate very closely in terms of economic policies destined for the recovery in the post-COVID era. And the third precondition is to utilize the EU Recovery Fund of 750 billion euros, so it's huge, as rapidly as we can. We can see already that there are problems. It's taking longer than we thought. There are small issues where it's really, really important to activate this recovery fund as rapidly as we can, so that it benefits the countries that need it the most.
So we need to be rapid, clever, agile, and collaborate.
Exactly. Exactly. Absolutely.
Was the Brexit the sign of that, or what was it? What do you think?
Well, I think the Brexit, one of the paradoxical effects of Brexit is to have shown to every single European that even if there are big problems with Europe, you are better in than out. And every day that passes in the UK since Brexit took place, so over the past 28 days, is proof of that. It's much more difficult to be outside of Europe than being in Europe. And in fact, Europe provides an immense range of benefits of which we're not even aware on a daily basis.
You talked before about changes and uncertainties, and that's for sure what COVID has brought us, a lot of, uncertainty. So I would like to ask you, sooner or later, I hope sooner, we're gonna get out of this pandemic, and hopefully for good. And what, clarity and what uncertainties will remain, after this COVID period? What do you think?
Well, Cristina, it's a phenomenal question. It's a great question, but it is so hard to respond to that because the world is by nature full of uncertainties. That's our human condition. We deal with uncertainties all the time. If there were only one certainty to mention, I would argue that it is certain that the world of tomorrow will be totally different from the world of yesterday. There'll be a pre-COVID era and there will be a post-COVID era, because this is the nature of major shocks. COVID is a major exogenous shock in economic terms, with dramatic social impact, implications politically, geopolitically, socially, etc. And it's the equivalent of a war in many respects. We explain that in the book. So it means that tomorrow's world cannot be like yesterday's world. It's going to be different. That's the only certainty. As for the rest, in terms of economic recovery, the social conditions in which this recovery will take place, the geopolitical environment, it's full of uncertainties and it's going to be country dependent. We can see already that the recovery in the US, which is a Western country, is going to be very different from the recovery in the EU, which is also a Western country. Well, maybe now less so thanks to the victory of Biden, but the two systems are so very different. So the recoveries will be different and the uncertainties of each will be very different in nature as well.
So I know I just put very difficult questions. Don't be mad at me, but I think this one will be even more difficult. So you say the world from tomorrow after COVID will be very different to the world we live now. Could you draw us a bit what this world of the future will look like? So it's kind of a visionary thing I'm asking you to do. But from your experience and from your studies and from all these conversations that you have, and maybe just your guess, how do you think this future will look like?
Well, my guess is worth nothing, I can tell you.
We'll love to hear it.
You're asking me an impossible question.
I know.
I'm going to do my best. I'm going to do my best to address it. The world of tomorrow will be immensely complicated. And what we see today, again, I'm an optimist, but what I see today can also drive me to bouts of pessimism sometimes. The bigger problem we face today is a problem of global governance. There is a complete lack of global governance, and all the problems that we face tomorrow are global in nature. So they need to be addressed from a collective point of view. They need to be addressed from the concept of nations. Whether you take a pandemic, whether it's climate change, whether it's terrorism, whether it's the future of wars, whether it's fiscal policies, whether it's money, interest rates, all these are totally intertwined, and they are global issues full of risks and opportunities, and they cannot be addressed by individual states alone. It doesn't make sense. They require a global coordinated response. And at the moment, it is obvious to all of us that the world is going in the opposite direction. You have regions that manage to work together. Europe is one. I think it's a prime example. ASEAN in Southeast Asia is another. But the world is being very polarized, and you have populists running countries all around the world, whether it was in the US until very recently, whether you take Russia, whether you take Turkey, whether you take India, whether you take Brazil. So this is a source of concern. And when you're asking me what the world of tomorrow will be like, it's going to be a very divided world, which is a cause of concern. We tend to be very tribal at the moment, to congregate around our group, and it's a discomforting sign, I think. So when you asked me to try to think about tomorrow, well, my simplest response would be this: we have to think about the world in scenario terms, because we can take different routes. And at the moment, we have two very broad routes. We are at a crossroads. Either we do not very much or nothing, or we just try to tweak the system at the margin. And this means that the world of tomorrow will be like the world of yesterday, but worse, beset by all sorts of problems, exacerbated by COVID. Or we take the other route and we decide to make it more inclusive, more sustainable, more equitable, and we face a bright future, hopefully.
So we need to act for sure. Standing still is not a solution.
No doubt, but it's difficult. When you talk to policymakers, it's such a difficult task. It's such a complex task. It's tough.
Change needs courage. We are here at CASA SEAT, and CASA SEAT is the home of SEAT, which is this automotive company in Spain and very also present in Europe. And the claim, the leitmotif of these premises is where the city moves. And this venue has opened within the pandemic with a claim where the city moves, when the city was totally quiet, right? No people going up and down, no people going to work, right? Everyone teleworking, homeschooling. So people have stopped to travel, have stopped to move around, right? So the mobility industry has a big challenge ahead. What do you think that the mobility industry could do, to face the challenges that COVID has brought?
Well, we have a chapter in the book devoted to that, and when I wrote the book, I spent quite a bit of time. When I co-wrote the book with Klaus Schwab, I spent a bit of time talking to experts and CEOs in the mobility industry. And it occurred to me that at the moment, the two key issues that mobility faces is an issue of tech, of innovation, disruption, and COVID has made it clear that the rate of acceleration of innovation is just phenomenal, and things that was inconceivable pre-COVID are now happening. Drone delivery, autonomous vehicles, batteries have made tremendous strides during the pandemic. So innovation is happening at an incredibly fast pace, with some amazing things happening when you realize that some of the future mobility companies may be tech companies. If you take Apple, if you take Tesla, these are tech companies. So in fact, every single company today has to be a tech company, and tech companies are entering the realm of activity and the realm of production, manufacturing of traditional mobility companies. The second realization is the one that I already expressed and that we discussed. It's sustainability. Sustainability is an absolute imperative, a necessity. Everybody sees it that way. And therefore, mobility will have to evolve in a way that makes it as sustainable as possible. And we're already seeing in cities the implications that this is going to have. For example, this new dream about 15-minute cities, cities in which you have everything that you need available in a 15-minute range on a bicycle or shared mobility. So the future of mobility, I don't think anybody has a global response at the moment because it touches upon so many different issues. but it's certainly going to be very different from what it used to be.
Yeah. Innovation, electrification for sure, connectivity. And CASA SEAT wants to be a tribute to the city of Barcelona, and the living lab of mobility and urban culture. And if mobility had a major challenge with COVID, also culture, I mean, theaters, concerts, exhibitions, things that are really very important for our lives, right, have been in some part not there, forbidden, and in others very restricted. How do you think that culture can reinvent, can reset, their way of life? Many difficult questions.
Yeah, it's so hard to tell. I think it's too early to tell because, like everybody else, like you, in Spain, in France, we've been in lockdown for many, many months. So we did miss culture. I mean, culture has to do with sociability. A lot of culture depends upon the interaction you have with others in museums, in theaters, in cinemas. And so we had to consume culture in a digital manner. So in my case, I started to buy opera on the web, which you could do, and it was great quality. But of course, we miss this human dimension. My hunch, my intuition, which is not based upon anything, it's just my gut feeling, is that culture will explode when the pandemic is over. I think the recovery will be painful economically, but there'll be a roaring 20s aspect in this. And anything that satisfies our most primordial aspiration for sense, for meaning, for culture, for interacting with people, will explode. We'll want to meet people again, to consume theater, cinema, restaurants. Food is culture. We'll want to go back to a restaurant. I don't know how this will take place because many people will be poorer as we exit from the pandemic. It's going to be tougher. So real culture will have to be as inclusive as possible. And I hope that theaters will become more affordable for people who have a hard time paying for it. And so it's a response that goes all over the place.
I love this carpe diem thing, right? I loved it. I'm really looking forward to it. I'm going to just ask one more question, then give over the word to the audience. And this question is, some people said that maybe governments led by women had better chances or took better decisions during the COVID times. And also when we talk about this economy of care, is very much related sometimes to women. Do you think we have to feminize a bit, economy in the future also? Or there's a bit of feminine skills, which is not only for women, but in general. But these skills of empathy, of communication, of collaboration, right, of care. Do you think that these skills are more necessary than ever in the future? And what's your opinion on that?
It's such a great question, Cristina.
Sorry, I have to do it.
And in fact, I've been studying it almost from the beginning because already 2 or 3 months in the pandemic, you could see that the countries that were the most successful in terms of containing the pandemic were led by women, often, not always, but often. And of course, the prime example is New Zealand with Prime Minister Ardern. And it's true for Finland, and even in the US, states led by women, governors who were women, seem to have had more success in terms of dealing with the pandemic. So, I've been spending a lot of time talking to academics, economists, psychologists, anthropologists, etc. And the question is, are women better at expressing empathy? Do women are women more altruistic than men, etc.? And opinions are very divided, very, very divided. But it is a fact, it is a truth that in this particular case of COVID, women leaders have had more success than men. And the reasons may be disputed, but it's true. Equally, and it's something that preceded the pandemic, that when you have a board or the senior leadership of a business with a great deal of diversity and led by women, these companies are more successful. It's incontrovertible. There are many, many, many studies that prove it. So I don't know whether it's a uniquely feminine trait, but you are absolutely right. I'm sure that in the post-pandemic era, we'll pay more attention to the quintessential qualities of altruism, empathy, etc. And by the way, in the book, we quote a study on Finland. I don't know whether you know, but in Finland, you teach empathy to children, starting in the kindergarten. And now there are many economists who've been looking at this, years back in terms of research, and it pays in terms of social capital. These countries have better social capital in terms of trust. They're high trust societies. They are better at building communities, and this is the lubricant that makes economic growth better in terms of quality and more sustainable.
If we have to compete with artificial intelligence in the future, we need to enhance our human skills, right? So it's pretty much about that.
It's our competitive advantage.
Exactly. We're gonna now, hand over the word to the audience if they want to ask something to you also. I hope you can hear them well. Otherwise, I will just repeat it or translate it. Si algú de vosaltres vol fer la pregunta en català o castellà, cap problema i la traduïm després. Val? Us portaran un micro. They're going to be handed over a microphone. And while the microphone is coming, Davos this year is going to take place in digital. So a lot of changes also for Davos. And all those people go there and gather and talk about the future of the world. And in the last year, maybe not that many things changed. Do you think that after the COVID, they will also, enhance those changes that you're talking about, the equality, climate, inclusion, diversity, collaboration? Do you think that COVID also will help, to have this?
You mean having that event or addressing these issues in events?
The fact that the event is different, the fact that the world has changed a lot, the shock of COVID will really make more aware the people, the attendants of Davos, and will make them take action, with the right aids that you mentioned: climate change, diversity, inclusion, equality.
Well, it was already apparent before COVID that every year more people were going into this direction. I think it's a structural change, a structural shift, and as you just pointed out, it's going to be made even more acute by what happened with COVID. Everybody understands that unless we make the world more inclusive and more sustainable, we are in a dead end. So it's going to happen by necessity.
Good news you bring. So we're going to have the microphone over here and see if we have some hands raised, some questions. We have one here.
Okay, second. Do you hear me? Okay. Thanks for your time, Thierry. Thank you very much for taking your time to communicate your message. Even if you are from a distance, we feel you close here. What do you think the companies will have to do in order to turn their mindsets thinking from GDP to social value?
Oh, what a great question. Thank you. Well, companies will have to embrace the principles of stakeholder capitalism. It's as simple as that. At the moment, the prevailing model, it's changing, it's shifting, but the prevailing model over the past 10, 15, 20 years has been the model of shareholder capitalism, in which everything justifies financial returns. The model put forward by Milton Friedman, the economist. If you embrace the principle of stakeholder capitalism, which can be, by the way, ingrained in formal institutional arrangements. If you're a big corp company today, you are obliged, you commit to sustainability, to inclusivity, and you are a good company, a good citizen for the global ecosystem in which you operate. It means that you pay attention to your employees more, you pay attention to your clients, to your suppliers, to the community in which you operate. So I think this is happening, and of course, I'm aware, like everybody, that there is a lot of greenwashing, workwashing, all sort of washing happening, and that many companies commit to this only in name. But what gives me a great deal of hope is the young generation. While researching the book, we said, okay, if nobody wants to do the Great Reset among my generation, the youth will do it, because the youth want to change. And every single survey, every single piece of research, pertaining to the young generation, millennials, generation Z, generation Y, etc., shows that there is a very profound desire for change among the young generation. So our habit in terms of doing things will change in the way that they embrace, which means more inclusivity, more attention paid to others, more altruism, and more attention to nature.
Some other questions?
It's not a done deal. It's going to happen slowly, but it's happening already.
Yeah.
Hello, Thierry. Good evening. We're facing elections here in Catalonia now, and Portugal, it was just last week. And this makes me think of politicians. And I have the feeling that we're also in a kind of a turning point in terms of politicians. And now that you're speaking about youth, I think we need a new generation of politicians precisely for this new world, with these new challenges you were mentioning and envisioning. But the thing is, will the youth be willing to engage in politics and to lead the new politics with this structure of political parties and this kind of system, which seems to be a bit difficult to overcome? So what do you think we can tell the youth, or what do we need, or how do the youth have to face this new political arena?
It's a great question, but it's a very, very complex question. When we wrote the book, I paid attention to what you just said, and we try to understand the many different surveys being conducted, particularly in the Western world, that say that on average, the youth is defiant vis-a-vis the democratic model. And in fact, a majority of people under the age of 30 does not believe that that democracy is capable of delivering the goods in terms of inclusivity, in terms of sustainability, etc. So very, very doubtful that we have the correct model, and it's something which is also corroborated by surveys conducted in more autocratic regimes, in which you observe that the youth is all right with autocracy, and many youngsters are. Well, patriotism is one thing, but nationalism is another. And particularly in Asia, you can see many young people embracing nationalism. So I must confess that I don't have an easy response to your question. The youth want more participative democracy. It's obvious. The old top-down model seems to be questioned by many young people. There is a complete disconnect in terms of time. Expectations are almost immediate, and when you consider the work of democracies, of liberal democracies, it takes time to make a decision. You have deliberations, you have parliaments, you have committees, and so there is this timing disconnect between the immediate expectation that so many people have about results and the model that proposes these solutions. So I'm afraid that my response to your question is, I'm not sure. I don't know. I can sense that there is change coming. Having spoken with so many policymakers when writing the book, I realized, how tough it is in today's world to make decisions, political decisions. It's incredibly tough. The world is complex. It's accelerating. It's totally transparent. So when you're a policymaker, you're exposed to all sort of attacks. I don't know. I don't know. I think the model needs to evolve, but I don't know in which particular direction. So my response is incredibly humble.
Great. We have another question there in the back. No? We have time for one more question. I wanted to ask you, if someone of them raises hands, the vaccine distribution, isn't it a metaphor of what could be done and what needs to be done? I mean, all countries fighting to get them first, who pays more? And when we know that if we all the world doesn't get vaccinated, the pandemic is not over. So what do you think about this issue with the distribution of the vaccine?
Well, I think that first there is a profound degree of immorality that has been highlighted by the head of the WHO in terms of vaccinations. I think, if I'm not mistaken, I think that today high-income countries whose population represents roughly 10% of the world population have bought roughly 75% of the available doses of vaccination. So it's a grabbing phenomenon. And naturally, these rich countries try to protect the population first, but not without paying attention. It seems, it may change, I hope, to the fate of the poorest countries. So there is a high degree of immorality, and there is also a high degree of blindness, because we don't realize that the world is completely interdependent, interconnected. And if the poor countries do not recover as rapidly as we do, the pandemic will continue to rage on, and it will have an impact on our own economies in rich countries. There was a report published about 2 days ago, I think, by the WHO, produced by academics, saying that if the current pace of vaccinations continues, so with poor countries not having access to vaccines, we will take, I think, 4 trillion hit in high-income countries. I need to check that, but I think it's roughly the figure. So a very substantial chunk of GDP because of supply chain problems and because of global trade issues. So our fate is a common one. We cannot exit a crisis without helping our poorest neighbors to do so as well. We are all in this, all in it together.
Sure.
So,
last question before we say bye to you and thank you for everything that you have shared would be, we know that, and we are absolutely agree that we need to protect the climate and work for equality. But in our daily life, in our daily routine, how can each of us act to contribute to that purpose? So in these new resolutions of 2021, that we want to protect the climate and be more empathetic and be more fostering equality and recognizing diversity, what specific things can each of us do in our daily life? If you can just name 3 or 4, small acts.
Sure. Well, first of all, I'm a fervent believer in the notion that every single step counts. Every single small action has a bearing, has a meaning. It's Lao Tzu, the famous philosopher, Chinese, who said that every journey of 1,000 miles starts begins with one single step. So, every one of us, we are 7.7 billion on Earth. Every single one of us has a capability to change things through individual action, and the aggregation of these individual actions has meaning. So how can we change? Well, we can do small things. We can travel less, and I think we will travel less in the post-pandemic era. We'll realize that flying is important. We want to travel to other destinations, but from now on, I used to fly to Barcelona on EasyJet. Maybe next time I will go on my bicycle. I don't know. That's one option, and I will enjoy the trip, the journey. So I think we'll be more conscious of this. Maybe we'll have a credit travel allowance, and once we've exhausted it, we'll stop traveling. So we'll be much more conscious of that. We can do the same with food. Every one of us by now knows that we need to consume food in a more responsible manner. We have to be extremely careful about animal proteins, etc. So, we can make an effort. And again, it's not a question of embracing radical change all at once, but small steps, leading by example, engaging in sustainable behavior, buying less stuff that we don't need, is a good step in the right direction.
So less is more, and more consciousness would be the summary, right?
Yeah.
So thank you very much, Thierry, and we hope that your optimistic view and your world of the future becomes true, and that the pandemic lets us enjoy this carpe diem that you were talking about sooner than later. Thank you very much. Close to him. Thank you.
So much for having me. Thank you. Thank you very much. Bye-bye. Good evening.
Thanks. Good evening. Bye-bye, Thierry.
Bye. Thank you.
Desde